G'day all. We are still in Jerusalem. If you can remember from last week and the week before, Paul was there. So a crowd gathered him around him, started beating him up. Centurion rescued/arrested him. Last week I spoke about how, and we looked at how Paul gave his testimony to the crowd. So still in Jerusalem, and he shared his testimony with them. We are in a whirlwind of trials and suffering for Paul. We are not going to see there's still some chapters to go, but I'm forewarning here. We are not going to see a rosy story of Paul having a vacation or a holiday on the beach somewhere at all. It is trials, as literal trials, standing before a judge. He's kind of in trial before the Sanhedrin. He's shipwrecked. Like, life is just tough for Paul. He knows it's coming. Remember, he said that to the Ephesian church, the elders, to say, I'm probably not going to come back and see you. I know that God wants me to go to Jerusalem and then on to Rome. So, but we are in a whirlwind of trials and suffering for Paul right now. And we catch up with Paul today before the Sanhedrin. Now, if you can remember who the Sanhedrin was, if you can't remember who the Sanhedrin was, I should say, they were the group of kind of religious leaders, and they were a court, in like a law court, a normal one, but to do with religious law. So there was the Roman courts that dealt with civil law, so theft, that kind of stuff. Speeding, if you were speeding in a chariot, but that kind of thing, the very civil stuff. And then there was the Sanhedrin, which dealt with religious law. So have you broken the religious law? So breaking the Sabbath, Romans didn't care about that. But if you broke the Sabbath, the Jews would. So that kind of stuff. And so Paul is standing before them, and the high priest orders that Paul gets punched. And Paul says to them, you're clearly not holy because you've just done something. You're not righteous because you've just broken the law, because you weren't allowed to strike someone without a trial. You couldn't punish someone without a trial. That was in law. They then go, this is the high priest. You shouldn't say that to him. And Paul, now, we're not entirely sure if Paul is a bit snarky here or whether he's being genuine, but he's like, sorry, I didn't realize that he was the high priest. Now, he could be going, I didn't realize he was the high priest, so I'm sorry, I do apologize. Or he could be going, sorry, didn't realize you're the high priest because you just broke the law that you're sworn to uphold. So it could be snarky or it could be kind of genuine. We're not entirely sure. Either way, that happens. And then Paul says something. And I'm going to read straight off the bat pretty much because I want to read the bit that Paul says and what happens after it, and then explain kind of why that happens and then the rest of the chapter. So we're in chapter 23. Again, encourage you, have a read of it through the week. It's not super long. It's 35 verses. You could read 5 a day and get it done. I encourage you to read all of it. It wouldn't take you long at all. So I'm going to read from verse 6 on a little bit, and then we'll talk about it. Then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, called out in the Sanhedrin, "My brothers, I'm a Pharisee, descended from Pharisees. I stand on trial because of the hope of the resurrection of the dead." When he said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. The Sadducees say there is no resurrection and that there are neither angels nor spirits, but the Pharisees believe all these things. So that's Luke kind of giving us some context there where he says that bit about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and what they believed. There was a great uproar, and some of the teachers of the law who were Pharisees stood up and argued vigorously. "We find nothing wrong with this man," they said. "What if a spirit or an angel had spoken to him?" The dispute became so violent that the commander was afraid Paul would be torn to pieces by them. He ordered the troops to go down and take him away from them by force and bring him into the barracks. The following night, the Lord stood near Paul and said, "Take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." So Paul is clearly told here that you're going to go to Rome, but I want to talk a little bit about what happens before the Sanhedrin. So we're going to do left and right. It's the easiest way to go. So Sadducees on the left side. Ignore the lights at the moment. This is more just to do with where they're positioning. So Sadducees were more political. They were Jewish, but they'd sided with kind of the Greek conquerors and the Roman conquerors early on because that got them power. And they were more interested in keeping that kind of political power than in following God's law. So they didn't believe in the resurrection. They didn't believe in angels. They didn't believe in spirits. They're kind of nominal Jews, like we would have people who are nominal Christians. People who go, yeah, I believe in God. Yeah, Jesus is okay, but they don't believe any of the stuff. They don't want to believe in heaven. They don't really want to. Well, they believe in heaven because that's a good place, but they don't want to believe in hell. They don't want to believe in sin. They don't want to believe any of that kind of stuff. Kind of the name, but not the actual intent and trusting what God has said about stuff. So that's the Sadducees. They don't believe in the resurrection. Now, that's a big one. Jesus comes up against that a couple of times, but that's really what this all sits around. Then there's the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees, Jesus has a fair few stern words to say to them in the Gospels, and really because the Pharisees should have got it right, because the Pharisees were interested in following God's law. They were really intense on it. They were better at understanding the law, and they believed in the resurrection. They believed in angels and spirits. They had a better spirituality than the Sadducees. They should have been better than what they were. And so that's why Jesus has a few things to say to them, because they should have got it. They should have seen what was happening. And so they should have been the ones who kind of cared for the poor and did all that kind of stuff as an outpouring of their faith, but they didn't. So that's why Jesus has beef with the Pharisees, but they believe in the resurrection. And so Paul says, in the middle of these two groups, Paul says, I'm here because I believe in the hope of resurrection, which isn't a lie, it's the truth. That following Jesus, there's resurrection, there's life for those who follow Jesus. Now, the Pharisees obviously go, yes, we believe in that. The Sadducees go, no, the guy's a lunatic, we don't give a stuff. And there's a fight that breaks out, a genuine fight, because we see it gets so violent that the commander of the guard's like, I've got to get Paul out of there before he gets torn to pieces. So the law court, not really a holy place at all. They're that violent. They're that aggressive about it. And so kind of Paul gets taken back to the barracks and kind of whisked away. Now, they couldn't agree with each other. And Paul knew that they couldn't agree with each other. So when Paul says, I'm here because of this, he knows that the Pharisees will go, okay, well, let's hear him out, kind of think, if that's all it is, then no, we'll let you free. You're fine. The Sadducees, on the other hand, go, doesn't even exist, mate. Pull your head in. We're gonna penalise you. Paul knew that they couldn't even agree with each other, and so they have a go at each other, and it's just a mess. They don't see eye to eye, but Paul is kind of then taken into barracks, and there's a plot to kill him. So. Because it was so violent and they just didn't get anywhere, the commander takes Paul into the barracks, and then they find out there's Paul's sister's son, I think is what it is. He hears about this plot to kill Paul, and the plan is that the Jews will say to the centurion, hey, we just want to find out a little bit more about Paul. We want to get a little bit more information. Can you bring him to us tomorrow? And their plan was that 40 of them would lie in wait, because Paul would have been taken with a big guard, but just a little bit. There were 40 of them that would wait, and they'd kill Paul on the way. In fact, they'd taken a vow to say, we're not going to eat until we've killed Paul, which I guess they all died because Paul doesn't get killed. Not here. The centurion hears about this from this guy, and instead of sending him down to kind of get killed the next day, he sends them off with a pretty significant sized detachment. Cavalry and infantry, a big guard, a guard that says, do not touch this person, a guard that would be able to repel an attack force of probably twice its size, just with Roman drill and discipline, but easily 40 kind of Jewish peasants they would have dealt with easily. But they go off and they send Paul up to Caesarea. So get him out of Jerusalem, send him away. Now that saves Paul's life. And as he's sent off, this guy writes a letter saying to the governor, hey, governor, stuff's gone on. I really want you to kind of take care of him because the trial down here was a farce. There's issues, and the Jews want to try him for this. Now, he said he's innocent. The Pharisees, well, they were really angry. The Sadducees were really angry. And this guy's a Roman centurion, so he's like, I got no idea what's going on. It's just not safe. It's not going to be a trial. This guy's a Roman citizen, so you can't just let this happen. This isn't good enough. I'll send him up there and you can take care of him. So he sends him off to the Roman governor. The Roman citizen bit's really important because the centurion knows that as a Roman citizen, Paul had rights, legal rights. If he was a Jew, if he wasn't a Roman citizen, for example, who cares? The centurion goes, whatever, you're not a citizen. There's no real legal protection for you. As a Roman citizen, born as a Roman citizen, which Paul says to him, because the centurion's like, how did you become a citizen? I had to buy my way in. Paul's like, I was born it. As a Roman citizen, he had legal rights, but the centurion was a bit worried about it. He goes, okay, well, I'll send you off to the governor who's Roman and he can sort it out, which is often what would happen. They'd send them off to governors. Their job wasn't just to kind of manage finances, about judgment. So Paul has gone from a trial in the Sanhedrin with the Pharisees and the Sadducees who got cranky to prison, and he's off to Caesarea to stand trial again before somebody else. So we'll see about that as we come up. Kind of a bit of information. There's a lot of logistics. I mentioned it earlier. He's going to stand trial before Felix, and off he goes. So we'll find more about that next week. In the meantime, have a great week.